So rounding our discussion of Frankenstein, we'll be looking at the 1994 version by Kenneth Branagh, with starring Robert de Niro. More recently, the 2015 version directed by Bernard Rose, who also, of course, did Candyman, starring Carrie Ann Moss and Danny Huston. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hello there.
And yeah, I thought that one of the things that I found interesting, looking back, is that like there's almost as many versions of Frankenstein as there are Dracula and stuff. And I feel like, what is it about this story that kind of really, is it, because it's kind of free property and like these different filmmakers kind of all want to take their stab at it? Or is there something that more like that fascinates us about this story?
I think, while Dracula's got a very kind of strong sort of sexual deviance tones to it that sort of runs through it, Frankenstein is kind of, it's got these very strong parental themes and this whole idea of mob mentality and individuals being persecuted and for their differences. And that's actually what's interesting. That's the similarity between both Dracula and Frankenstein. They're about people who are different but are still very much real characters that you sometimes feel sorry for, sometimes don't, but ones that society just cannot sort of abide, basically.
Yeah, I think it is an underlying fear that we have of that. Different times we're rejected, and then other times kind of people turn on us. I think that is something that kind of it's a very primal fear. It's one of the reasons why we're always kind of concerned about fitting in, right, and stuff. From pretty much the time that we start recognizing that, like kind of we're different from other people and stuff.
Yeah, and I think the difference as well is that with Frankenstein, you've almost got this general theme of something that is looking for meaning in life and is finding it very difficult, or it can't, basically. And in Dracula, you almost have the opposite, in that it's a character who's lived so long that life has basically lost its meaning, really.
Yeah.
So it's they're quite interesting kind of juxtaposed stories in that way.
Definitely. So yeah, let's get started the 1994 version. I found it interesting that Frank Darabont, who of course, besides The Walking Dead and other properties that like with Stephen King that he's done and stuff, he wrote the script, and he describes it as the best script I ever wrote and the worst movie I've ever seen. So he kind of pretty much disavowed himself from this project and stuff, saying that Kenneth Branagh put his stamp on it. And I feel like personally that this movie actually receives a lot of almost undue kind of prejudice, or kind of that, like it's I don't know, personally I didn't think it was that bad a movie, I guess.
I did think it was that bad.
Oh, really?
And
interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
it took me 2 or 3 watches to get all the way through it.
Wow.
I just felt it was so, obviously, movie studios, they've seen Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1992 and said, all right, how can we cash in on this? Let's do Frankenstein. Let's do it all with this, lavish sets and everything that's very period. And Kenneth Branagh is obviously hot off whatever Shakespearean movie it was that made him famous. I don't know if it's like A Midsummer's Night Dream or something like this. And so they hire him, and he gets his mates involved, and it turns into this sort of really kind of almost camp pageant of thespianism, of people kind of overacting and being terribly lovey and spinning each other around, dancing and laughing and ha 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 and all this kind of stuff, but with really no kind of existential dread or exploration of the themes, in my opinion. But I mean, it does try to stick closely to the novel, but it's just, there's so much laughing and dancing and frivolity and topless Kenneth Branagh in between that it's hard to sort of, it's strange that this could even be described as a horror movie. It's more just like a sort of Shakespearean romp with a badly made up Robert De Niro in it.
Wow. And I definitely thought that, like, different times, like, it had this kind of feel of like kind of, you're watching like this opera, like kind of where kind of, like I said, there's this kind of very much a lot of over the top performances and stuff. I at the same time, I did feel like kind of, the De Niro was also like really ambassador for his performance here, but I feel like he kind of really just kind of, was kind of doing his thing, kind of, he's kind of really, embodying this monster that's kind of, pitiful, and at the same time, somebody that like, it's also like kind of, horrific in various ways and stuff.
I mean, I just thought, why do we need about like a minute of, oiled up Kenneth Branagh sort of trying to sliding around in liquid with the naked Robert De Niro trying to make him stand up? That whole scene. I mean, they're trying to recreate the whole kind of birth thing. They're kind of birthing this undead thing into the world, but I don't know. At that point, I was already so sort of. I would say I would press the abort button and move on, but
yeah, that was a lot of amniotic fluid. It kind of made me wonder. It made me wonder, like after he emptied that first batch, where did he get, like kind of the second one to refill it?
Yeah, it's a very wet scene. There's a lot of fluid being exchanged there and flying all over Kenneth Branagh. It was
that was the horror.
That was the most horrible thing in the whole movie, to be honest with you. Yeah. I mean, there's just lots of things in it that didn't make sense. He's experimenting with electricity, and Elizabeth is there sort of jokingly spraying water at him while he's experimenting with electricity, and then he goes out and finds one computer generated, or whatever it was, single thundercloud that just seemed to be floating by itself in the sky, and he was going to channel lightning from that, but he chooses to take out his love interest and the whole family to go and get struck by lightning.
Right.
It was, I mean, I suppose that's an indication of his careless disregard for humanity and his kind of drive for success. But his character isn't really like that. They try to make his Victor Frankenstein as someone who's wants to find the way to sort of bring people back to life because he's trying to cure them, or so they try and make him as a very sympathetic character rather than an ambitious kind of slightly psychopathic character.
Well, yeah, it starts off that way because his mother dies, and so that kind of shows how is this kind of that thing he wanted to kind of allow people to be together forever. Kind of it's like that he argues again and again in this medical kind of training, whatever, that like death isn't a real thing and stuff. It's something that we've kind of created, so to speak.
Yeah, it's quite interesting in that respect. I mean, whereas you've got this theme in Bram Stoker's Dracula of love that kind of pervade death and life and exist over hundreds of years through some kind of reincarnation. They're trying to sort of do something similar with this, in that he's sort of like, well, you can keep hold of the ones that you've loved through death and bring them back. But this sort of desire to do this is from his mother dying, and he obviously, it's almost like he has become a sort of a mother to Frankenstein in a way. He becomes, which is kind of in keeping with Mary Shelley's vision of this sort of twisted male birthing kind of ritual that creates this monster, which is against all forms of nature.
And that's a funny kind of parallel, right? Like, here we have like, Frankenstein, like you said, Dracula, and even the Mummy, right? Where each time there's this kind of desire to fight off death and stuff like that. So on the one hand, the monsters symbolize kind of, death incarnate and stuff like that. But on the other, there's this kind of theme running through all these that like, it's us as mankind trying to fight off death and trying to, basically deny like kind of, like our mortality and kind of, like whether we're trying to, bring back our mother, or trying to bring back a lost love, or we're trying to, kind of preserve like a love across time and stuff like that. Yeah. And there were lots of bits in this where, well, I mean, obviously
he tries to bring back Elizabeth, which is sorry, as always, spoiler alert, sorry, but you know, that was quite horrifying, I suppose, when he brings her back and she's looking pretty worse for wear. And,
definitely. It was like a twisted marionette, you know, kind of in this dance macabre kind of,
yeah. And that sort of, I guess that was quite effective, the way you felt like he was sort of, trying to be like the puppet master of various people's lives by doing this.
And also like kind of that, you know, like, you know, again, it's major spoiler also that like they end up in this tug of war, like, you know, he's saying, you know, like kind of say my name, and then also like kind of, you know, he's proclaiming, oh, she's mine, you know, kind of this idea that people are, you know, kind of possessions and stuff and something to be owned.
I mean, her entire existence is kind of like her life and death. He feels he's the master and controller of in some way. So
I guess we should mention, of course, that Elizabeth is played by Helen Bonham Carter. Which I have we talked about her? Like, kind of, I feel like we might have had her in something, but
she was in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Sorry.
And I'm sure she's been in something else we've watched recently. I mean, normally, you know, very good. I quite like Helen Bonham Carter.
Yeah.
In this, she's like, it's sort of Shakespeare thespian lovey to 11 on this one.
Yeah, definitely.
There's so much. Well, I can sort of describe most of the performances in this as a lot of pageantry, but not very much sincerity. I didn't really feel like any of them. I felt like it was all just like I was watching an over-the-top theatrical production, but there wasn't actually real kind of human connection or emotion in this stuff. The one exception to that, and I think he deserves a huge amount of credit, was John Cleese as the one of the doctors that Victor Frankenstein is studying under, who sort of starts the process of how you could use electricity to bring life to you know, what he builds his research of. And actually, I thought John Cleese's performance was really sincere, very realistic, and total surprise. I mean, normally John Cleese just plays John Cleese, and in this, he really does put in a great performance.
Sad that you know, De Niro plays this anti-vaxxer who stabs him, you know, and then, you know, what's called his brain becomes the raw material, I guess, for the creature.
That's right. Yeah. I suppose I didn't think about that in terms of the pandemic. Yeah, he's like Frankenstein. The criminal is the original anti-vaxxer, isn't he?
Yeah, seriously. I guess they had the smallpox plague that was running through the town and stuff like that. So it's weird that kind of, you know, that they kind of, you know, this is 1990, you know, 4, right, stuff. So this is way before any of this.
Absolutely. And then we've got I can't remember his name of the actor, but he played. We've got Ian Holm, who is fairly subdued in this, I would say.
Yeah.
And puts in a pretty solid performance. And I can't. The guy who was in Amadeus. I can't remember his name. Tom Hulce. Right. Yeah. He's almost he's just as sort of pageantry and over the top as Kenneth Branagh.
He rounds out that.
I mean, I think it was just. I think actually it was like Kenneth Branagh's performance that was the real miscalculation in this, which is ironic, him being the director,
right?
Because he tries to make him far too sympathetic, and I don't think Victor Frankenstein is. We don't need him to be sympathetic, really. Really, if anything, you want Frankenstein's monster to have a sympathetic role, and I didn't really feel like, you know, De Niro as the monster got very much screen time. Most of it was just Kenneth Branagh.
That's true.
And so, you know, you really didn't see a clear development from him stumbling around in amniotic fluid naked, and then all of a sudden he's reading books and sort of writing his journal and things like this. You didn't really, you know, that kind of development would have been more interesting to watch, I think, than Kenneth Branagh running around topless. But yeah.
And I think it's also ironic that you know, what's called that this love this romance kind of develops. It's kind of like out of this kind of incest kind of relationship, because they're brother and sister, like, you know, even though it's adopted, I guess. And you know, like yeah, like what's it called? Helen Bonham Carter is kind of doing this kind of earlier manic pixie trope and stuff like that. That supposed to represent life. And I think the most ironic part too is that they end up in this affair, real life affair that ends up breaking up his marriage to Emma Thompson and stuff. So that's kind of really, I guess, the strangest part. Despite kind of what you're, I agree with what you're saying, that you didn't feel like this kind of real spark there, but yet apparently it kind of was something kind of off screen that was going on.
Yeah, it's funny because I knew Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson were together, but I never really delved into why they broke up. And it's interesting that Helena Bonham Carter is the reason why.
Yeah.
But didn't she? Wasn't she married to Tim
Burton?
Tim Burton, yeah.
Ultimately, yeah. After this, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, funny. It's a funny world.
But I mean, Kenneth Branagh is quite a good actor. I mean, he's definitely pulled in some good performances. I mean, in Dunkirk, he's great. He's actually, I quite liked him as, the slightly bad wizard in Harry Potter. He's pretty good. Gilderoy, that's right. And, so he's definitely a talented actor. There's no doubt about it. But I don't know about directing. It seemed to me like he didn't know where he miscalculated Victor Frankenstein's character. You didn't really feel particularly sorry for Elizabeth, and there was just a kind of slightly morbid ending for her. And likewise, I just don't think he got the most out of Robert De Niro either. Somehow he managed to channel a great performance out of John Cleese, though. So there's that, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a funny part, right? Where it's different times like you said, give him a lot of credit for his acting and different things and stuff. He's actually directed a lot also, but I think this was like one of his earlier projects. So I don't think he's kind of, I'm trying to think of what he kind of might have directed before that, but I can't think of anything much. But I don't think at the same time this is his first movies that he's directed though. So
yeah, he was known for kind of Shakespearean stuff in the early 90s in England. But yeah, no, I think a different director could have saved this, because I think even with the existing cast, it could have been a very good movie. But yeah just. And what did you think of the structure in that you start with them actually fast forwarding to the North Pole where they're trying to confront Frankenstein?
Well, apparently,
apparently
that's still keeping pretty much with the book, right? I didn't realize that, and so I thought there was nothing really wrong with it. It's interesting we see Aidan Quinn again, this time as the captain, who we had in The Handmaid's Tale in a more minor role. Actually, I guess this is a relatively minor role as well. But he definitely shows up at funny places, and I thought it was fine. I mean, definitely it wasn't too jarring a thing that like it was kind of the convention of like basically the rest of the movie is like kind of a flashback, and then we kind of fast forward back to their time and stuff like that. I think the confrontation at the end, it's funny. I mean, I can see why they've changed it in other versions of the movie, because it does feel like a bit of a sort of a letdown after everything that's happened before. I see.
There's no real climax like there would be in the 1931 version. It's him just sort of floating off on an iceberg. It's a bit weak, really. But accurate to the book, I suppose. But it's funny in that, like, Bram Stoker's Dracula from 92 isn't faithful to the book, but they clearly decided to finance this one based on that movie. So it's surprising that they didn't try and do something a little more creative. And what I must say, they're both kind of over the top movies, but why the 92 works is because it feels more like a magic show in a way, and it presents lots of varied visual effects and costumes and various other things. This one just feels over the top because everyone's just kind of, it's expensive sets and things like this, and they do try and sort of add some realism of the time, but I don't know if you noticed, there's so much spinning cameras in this. Like,
Yeah,
they're dancing around, the whole camera's spinning, and they're talking and they're spinning, and it's like we've got to try and we've got to try and make these conversations more interesting and dynamic. But it doesn't really add to the emotional impact of the movie.
I mean, I got to give them credit for the effects of like kind of when they were, bringing the creature to life. That part was like kind of really, captivating and stuff.
I don't know why did he need to swing on a chain from one end of the lab to the other? It was just, I mean, it's very.
It looked cool.
It didn't though. It just looked ridiculous. It looked like River Dance or something. It was crazy.
Right.
Or like a Duran Duran video. I mean, you think back to the Hammer version, and it was basically a room. They did everything in. But yeah, so I suppose it's one way of making it more dramatic, but yeah. So I guess then, should we move on to the 2015 version?
Yeah, I think definitely. So it's interesting that Bernard Rose chose this as a project and stuff. Of course, like we mentioned, the creator of Candyman, and of course, later on towards the end of the movie, we see, of course, Tony Todd, as Eddie and stuff, the homeless man. I thought that the whole thing of like kind of basically we see the birthing process where like kind of this being coming to life. It reminded me a lot of RoboCop. Kind of it was effective use of the kind of the POV of kind of from the monster's point of view, and then later on I thought it was interesting also that they used dream sequences that was kind of again very reminiscent of what we saw in RoboCop.
Yeah, it has. I think it's, as well as this, what I really liked about this version is that you're just presented with this person who already narrates his inner thoughts in a way that he could never actually express.
Right.
So you assume that they already put this expectation that he's just a normal person, but then you sort of see him flailing around and doing random things and sort of trying to nurse himself on Carrie Ann Moss and things like this. And you realize, oh, there's something quite strange going on here.
Definitely.
And the way they kind of show this kind of baby development through a grown adult is really interesting, in the way that his performance of feeling betrayed and things like this at people's actions and doing that was really good, I thought, actually.
Yeah.
I have to say though, this movie was one of those ones that I found myself alternating between finding it very funny and very bleak and depressing periodically, because it was,
I can see that,
because it was a very, very sad story, really, but also quite a ridiculous one at the same time. So
so what did you think of like kind of the idea that bringing in an actual mother figure, because we've talked about that, how like kind of that was removed from the all these other ones and stuff, and how
I thought that was an interesting take on that, because this is really the original point of Mary Shelley's book, but this was a birth without a female involved. And this one, you have a woman involved, but because it's a completely artificial creation of life, there's no actual birth. It sort of creates the same kind of scenario, this sort of denial of the natural order. And in this, it's kind of, I would say, somewhat more powerful, because this is a sort of a woman who's been completely removed from the natural order, and he doesn't even really want anything to do with her sort of created child that she's printed in a 3D cellular printer. And that's what's, you get this, you don't really get this rejection of the creator and the being in other versions of Frankenstein as strongly as you do in this one, because it's so kind of framed in a parental way that you really see him desperately trying to sort of find his way back to his mother, and keep seeing these kind of images in his head, and he's trying to track her down, and she's constantly kind of rejecting him or trying to get rid of him in some way or kill him, basically. So it's a really I don't know. It's dark. It's a dark themed movie. This one.
And it centralizes on the monster a lot more. What's called because like normally in the past we have like this tension, right, of the like where Victor Frankenstein, in this case played by Danny Huston, where he's often kind of trying to fight off Elizabeth and the other ones from finding out what he's doing and stuff like that. Here she's a cohort. She's part of the whole process and stuff. And then of course, like we mentioned, she plays this kind of surrogate mother, like kind of not by choice. And then, like you said, ultimately, kind of abandons him and stuff. The monster, and also that kind of goes back to apparently Shelley's, own kind of fears of abandonment. Kind of losing her mother when she was, at birth and stuff like that. And this also like kind of plays upon this kind of weird Oedipus kind of theme. That's something that like we don't really see like in the other ones as well.
Absolutely, yeah. You don't get that so much. You kind of get a bit of incest in the 94 one, but it's more, well, I suppose you do in all of them really with Elizabeth. But the one element that is less, which is much sort of toned down in this one, is this idea of the sort of master scientist that is somewhat psychotic in its, in their drive to outdo God and make this creation. In this one, it's kind of, they do it and they realize they screwed up and they just try and get rid of it as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
I guess that's kind of similar, but yeah, you don't get as much of the kind of egotism of the creators as you did in other versions. Yeah, and it's this one I felt was much more focused on society and the mob mentality and all that kind of thing. Well, not even really the mob mentality, just more kind of society's reaction to people who can't help themselves, really, or people that are so different that we can't really find a place for them. Because this one, he's abandoned with no kind of way of working in the world and no, there's just no support nets. They make a point of showing that, he immediately becomes homeless and people try and sort of rob him and he's shot by the police and, he basically has no way of surviving. There's a lot of eating dead animals in this movie as well for those of a nervous disposition. It's kind of...
Yeah, they definitely didn't hold back with that. It's pretty also sad that like he befriends again, as always, major spoiler, that he befriends his dog and like that's his only companion, and even the dog gets shot. It was kind of like how sad, how much sadder can you make things and stuff. I think we also, it's interesting how they touch on police brutality. That's something that kind of, I think, and this is 2015, which I guess it wasn't quite the hot topic or hot button. It was already starting, I guess. Yeah. I feel like that's kind of what they were also echoing.
Yeah. Well, I think as well, there was probably, I'm sure in California, there was probably homeless issues as well. I think it probably is a much bigger statement on that, how easy it is to fall through the cracks of society and how little help you can get. And I mean, you've got this sort of very benevolent character played by Tony Todd, who's the the musician, and one of my favorite scenes was the one where because he's blind in this, which is actually kind of this is not too far removed from the original, and then it was there was a blind person who befriends Frankenstein in the novel. So Frankenstein's monster. Sorry, I keep making that sort of newbie mistake there, and that was actually a lot of fun, especially when he asks him to go and get some food out of the dumpster, and he pulls out a rat and presents it to him. And then I guess there was also the scene with the prostitute that was also pretty strange, and that he's so his cellular degradation is so extreme that basically you can't even tell what gender he is or if he's barely human anymore. And that was also quite depressing, but also,
that was pretty horrific. I mean, just that his condition got that bad.
But it's again, it's kind of like you've got this it reminds me a little bit of the Metallica song One, which is about someone who's basically had most of their limbs destroyed in a kind of some sort of blast, and they've lost practically all their senses as well.
Wow.
And all they can do is kind of like, tap or sort of nod their head or something. That's their only form of communication. And you kind of feel this is somewhat similar in that you've got this person who's is alive and is physically present in the world, but can't really communicate effectively with anyone and can't sort of exist emotionally with anyone. It's like he has no emotional ties, can't create any kind of emotional ties with anyone that he comes to see, or he gets it wrong and screws it up somewhere. And it's very depressing that his dreams are just of this kind of utopic vision of, in his own short existence, of him playing with his dog and sort of hanging out with his mum, and that's about it really, being held by his mother and his dog, and that's all that for him is like it, it's
I mean, it's. I feel like the one kind of question that it's also asking is like, like we're already kind of 3D printing organs, right? And stuff. It's like if we get to the point that we're 3D printing a person stuff, like kind of. I mean, is this a person? And like kind of. I mean, maybe it can even breathe, live and breathe, like literally. Then like kind of, is that a person and stuff? And like what because like towards the end, right, where he's like, really kind of, like I said, his cell degeneration is really extreme and stuff like that. Frankenstein's solution is like, oh, we're just gonna print another version of you. You'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was very interesting. This whole idea that, he was intelligent enough and conscious enough to know that his consciousness was unique in the world, and consciousness can't be kind of printed. I guess that's the other message towards the end there, really, that there is no scientific understanding or way to replicate consciousness, and probably, I don't know, I'm a skeptic. I don't think we'll ever really be able to do it with AI or
that definitely dives into the whole Westworld things that we've talked about.
Absolutely. We won't go down that rabbit hole, but but yeah, so that was a really interesting sort of comment, this idea that if we probably can at some stage perfectly replicate people at a cellular level, but I think they will probably, and if we can kind of keep them in some sort of the tissue at least alive in some respect, but I don't know that we can actually imbue that living tissue with consciousness. That would be the real kind of, I suppose we could, but we're not too far away from that now, really, are we?
Right. But yeah, I feel like that's like kind of the question, and it kind of, we're brushing up against it, but meanwhile I feel like like kind of what at least what this film kind of shows is that, like, well, there's gonna be a price to pay. Kind of, if you can do all that
wrong. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if he wasn't degrading, then it wouldn't have been too bad really for him. He would have had quite an interesting life, apart from getting shot in the face by a policeman. The rest of it could have been, you could have salvaged something from it. But I mean, I can see a time when we will definitely have very wealthy people will probably 3D print their copies of their own bodies that are inanimate and unconscious, so they can harvest it for various body parts later on in life or something.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's coming in the not too distant future.
Yep, that'll be the whole immortality thing that we've talked about different times, and it's like kind of, that's like you mentioned before on the other episode that right now that's what the tech billionaires are shooting for, is to be able to kind of 3D print their immortality.
Yeah, I'll tell you what this did kind of remind me of. It reminded me of Family Guy. It reminded me of Stewie quite a lot. Yeah, because
how so?
Well, you've kind of got this inner monologue of this person who can't really communicate with anyone else, and he's very sort of eloquent and poetic in this voiceover. He's saying, I glanced upon my mother in the dream, yearned for her touch and things like this, and it just reminded me of like Stewie's character, which is kind of like this baby who's very eloquent and intelligent but can't actually speak to anyone. So yeah, he's kind of like a real life Stewie episode almost of Family Guy that's got horribly wrong in a way. He even has a dog. It's like Brian.
Right. I didn't think about that.
And he's trying to kill his mother.
No.
It's just like a very serious Family Guy episode in a way.
And what's sadder and what's darker, that's for sure.
Yes, that's for sure. Yeah.
Alrighty. So yeah, we'll at a later stage, we'll be looking at maybe next week. We'll be looking at Wolfman, and then coming up Nightmare on Elm Street. And for the holidays, we've got Home Alone, as we've mentioned before. So yeah, thanks for watching. Once again, John Chang with Dan Edmonds, and we'll see you at the movies.